So this is going to be dry, but hopefully important and informative. And if anyone's got any questions afterwards, my email is jeremy.leggett@solarcentury.com. But I'm here today to talk about the carbon bubble because I'm also chairman of Carbon Tracker, which is a little think tank of folk from in and around the city there, looking at this carbon bubble that we fear is building in the capital, we know is building in the capital markets, and what it means and how it may be useful in actually finally persuading policymakers to do something about this horrendous threat to civilization and the future for our children. Because if we know one thing after the last few years, we know that we collectively, humans, are capable of massive oversight of systemic risks. That's what the financial crisis has taught us. We know this. It was a good news story that almost everyone believed, either tacitly or explicitly, that has proved to be so catastrophic that it brought the banking system within hours. It brought our economies within hours of going under. So we know that, and if we're capable of doing it collectively in the financial sector, are we capable of doing it in other sectors? And the answer to that is very clearly yes, because we allow, collectively, the energy sector to accrue all these fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas, as assets and account them, literally account them as assets on their balance sheets, as though there is zero risk that policymakers will ever do anything about cutting their use. And of course, not only have policymakers promised to do that, but some policymakers, including our own in this land, have actually signed that promise into law. We have a Climate Act, and we have to, politicians have to deliver on targets and timetables to cut and stop the burning of fossil fuels. So how dysfunctional is that? It's like two planets. On one planet where people, turn up at climate summits and talk about cutting fossil fuel use and saving our children from the dire threat that is climate change. And in many cases, I would even say most cases, even in governments, they're serious and full of intent to do that. And anyone who's been to the climate negotiations will know that's true. The vast majority of people there are there in good faith, and they're trying to do something about it. But meanwhile, the great juggernaut that is the fossil fuel industry just carries right on with their suicidally dysfunctional status quo, building up this great bubble of carbon that, as we heard earlier from Peter, 80% of it can't be burnt if we're to be anywhere near serious about 2 degrees. And actually, as someone else, I forget who earlier said, it's worse than that, because this is based on the assumption, that the assumption that is par, as it were, that most climate scientists will buy into, which omits the feedbacks, the natural amplifications of global warming that we all know are out there, but which are difficult to quantify. So in Carbon Tracker, what we're trying to do is very simple. We're just trying to get right across the financial chain people to actually own up to the risks that are being taken. So when coal companies come to this city to float on the stock exchange, they have to say in their prospectuses that there is a risk that all the money they're raising that goes into coal will actually be producing coal that can never be burned. That risk. And the accountants, when they sign off on the annual reports, actually require these people to say why it is they think that there is zero risk of their assets being impaired, which is code for being forced to leave them in the ground. And what really excites me about the potential we have to turn this into a real lever is what the neuroscientists are finding out about how we think individually and collectively. There is a belief system over there in that city that is fundamentally troubled by what we're saying, and they find it very difficult to deal with because ultimately they have no answer. And so if they were forced to talk in their annual accounts and and in their IPO prospectuses and all the other documentation that they have to produce in turning fossil fuel resources into reserves and therefore assets, what they would have to say is, you know what, there is no risk of these assets being impaired because we all know that politicians can never deliver on what they say they're going to do. And that is their only defense. And if you look at some of the coverage in the press of carbon tracker reports, you'll see that. It's not a logical response, it's a belief system under threat. As one anonymous analyst said in the Financial Times, when asked, you know, what do you say about this argument that you are accounting assets at zero risk of impairment that actually are at risk of impairment, the anonymous analyst said to the Financial Times, the Financial Times reported this is a bollocks subject. It has no meaning on my life. Now, when you think about that, that's not a logical response. That's not like, we're pricing in the risk, man, and actually it's going to be okay, you know, it's all taken care of. This is a bollocks subject. It has no meaning on my life. Sir, lady, what university did you go to? You know, this is not a logical response. So we have a real opportunity with our allies, Fair Pensions and other organisations to do something about this. We're going to do our very best to do it, and that's all I have to say, and thank you all for turning up in this terrible weather and listening.
Thank you for turning up. Okay, just a reminder that if anybody wants to get involved with